Today we're going to talk about the radicals and how they took control of the Congress and took control of Reconstruction. As you recall, the radicals didn't like Lincoln's plan and they surely did not like Andrew Johnson's plan. There's going to be a showdown between the presidency and the Congress that we'll talk about later. But this time, we're going to talk about the radicals taking control. Now, while the radical Republicans are trying to fight this war with Andrew Johnson about whose plan is going to take control, stuff's happening in the South. The South wasn't following guidelines. Many passed black codes. The South wasn't following guidelines. Many passed black codes. Black codes were very harsh forms of Jim Crow laws. For example, if you didn't own land, you couldn't stay in town. You had to leave. You could stay in town a max of 3 days. This forced a lot of people to move around. They couldn't settle down, try to set up shop, and get something going. The Congress didn't like this. After all, yes, technically African Americans were not slaves, but they weren't being treated correctly. So what they did is they helped pass the 14th Amendment giving African Americans citizenship. They passed the 14th Amendment giving African Americans citizenship. By becoming citizens, you've done several things. Number one, you have reversed the Dred Scott decision of 1857. Remember, Dred Scott couldn't sue in a court because he was not a citizen of the United States. Well, guess what? African Americans are now citizens. Therefore, they're entitled to legal rights and they can be protected. We still use this today. Basically, not only does it cover African Americans, it covers anyone born in the United States. And what we'll be doing is in this unit, we're going to be going over the amendments, the Reconstruction Amendments. You will need to know the 13th, the 14th, and the 15th Amendment. You already know the 13th Amendment, that abolished slavery. 14th Amendment gives African Americans citizenship. We'll talk about the 15th Amendment in just a few. So the Radicals finally passed the Reconstruction Act of 1867. The Reconstruction Act of 1867. What this does is this basically takes the Wade Davis bill that the Radicals proposed back in 1864 and was able to really be fleshed out a little bit more in how they were going to get the South reconstructed. For example, it divided up the South for military rule. It divided up the South for military rule. If these governments won't enforce federal law, well, By golly, the federal government will. They will appoint union generals to be the chief administrators of each district. They're going to divide them up into 5 different districts. North Carolina and South Carolina will be their own district. You'll see a map in your book. It's your homework tonight. It's question number 6. And what's going to happen is Union troops will be stationed down here to make sure that the new policies are carried out. What policies, you might ask? Well, African American males allowed to vote. Notice the key word, males. Sorry, ladies. White African American ladies, you don't get the right to vote until 1920. And indeed, African American males do vote and vote in large numbers. In fact, what happens because a lot of white Southerners still have yet to take the loyalty oath, their status of being a war criminal, I guess, is still up in the air. Well, what happens is African Americans vote and African American males serve in the state and federal legislatures. North Carolina, admittedly, only had one African American legislator. However, other states such as Mississippi, Alabama had 10 or so. States must pass the 14th Amendment. No ifs, ands, or buts. The Congress, put it through and it's going to go in the Constitution. And by golly, South, you better go for this and you better ratify it. Otherwise, we're not going to let you back in the Union with the full rights and privileges thereof. So states must pass the 14th Amendment. And new state constitutions must be approved by Congress. New state constitutions must be approved by Congress. So this goes back to the old Wade Davis bill of the idea that state constitutions must have slavery banned expressly written in them. And indeed, North Carolina is no exception. North Carolina's Constitution is approved in 1868. So when we take a look at the North Carolina Constitution of 1868, we go down to Article 1, Section 17. Slavery and involuntary servitude. Slavery is forever prohibited. Involuntary servitude, except as punishment for crime, wherever the parties have been alleged guilty, is forever prohibited. So this is straight out of the North Carolina Constitution of 1868. We had to get it approved by Congress. But Andrew Johnson, what's up with Andrew Johnson? What is his game plan? What does he think of the radicals? Well, he's not getting along with them, as you know. And the radicals don't like Johnson either. After all, he's a Southerner. He's from Tennessee. He was a compromise candidate to keep the border states in the Union and to show the Confederate states that they were still in the Union. Well, they're going to try to impeach Johnson. Radicals tried to impeach Johnson. He was the first president to be impeached. The House of Representatives drew up charges and went to the Senate. The House presented their case. The Supreme Court justice presided over it as the main judge, and the Senate was the jury. Now, what they did is the inside knowledge is that the radicals set up Johnson. They really wanted him out. They wanted him gone. Even though he was a Republican, he was not a radical. They thought he was too wimpy on Reconstruction. So what they did is they kind of set him up by passing a law that states Johnson could not remove a cabinet member without approval by Congress. Well, Johnson removed the cabinet member. And the legislature came back and said, "Oh, President Johnson, you have broken the law. You are guilty of high crimes and misdemeanors." So they put him on trial. And the radicals counted heads ahead of time, figured we got enough votes. Well, Johnson survived his impeachment. He survived by one vote. And one of the most famous people who was a Republican but went against the party line and voted for Johnson was a guy named Edmund Ross. He was a senator from Kansas. He was well known for voting against Johnson. I was voting for Johnson against his impeachment. In fact, what happened is John F. Kennedy, while a senator in the 50s, wrote a book called Profiles in Courage, and he chose Edmund Ross because he stood up to his own political party and said, "I'm not going to let you railroad this guy. You can't do that. We set him up. We should be ashamed of ourselves." Well, they also passed the 15th Amendment, giving African Americans the right to vote. They passed the 15th Amendment, giving African Americans the right to vote. Passed the 15th Amendment, giving African Americans the right to vote. The reason they did the reason they did that is because what happened was there were some laws that were being passed as the states were starting to get reconstructed about poll taxes and literacy tests and grandfather clauses. And the radicals wanted to make sure that African American male suffrage was allowed, that they were given the right to vote. So what it's kind of doing is that the South is acting like a little teenager. They're trying to find ways around the rules, and the radicals have to lay down the law, be the strict parent. All right. Thank you very much, guys. Hope you learned a lot.